Thanks a lot, James. Good morning, everyone. I was supposed to be here at 8:45, but today was just,
Apparently because it rains.
I'm going to use one term quite a lot in this session, which is we are living in a VUCA world. Yeah, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this terminology. VUCA is VUCA, which is volatile, uncertain, unpredictable, and ambiguous world. So in the VUCA world, commuting for 2 hours in the morning from Sandhurst, which is the southeast of Melbourne, not from the Middle East all the way to Melbourne, was definitely a good experience.
It's going to be interesting talking to you because you have got, as I said, so much experience in different roles, and we're talking about the strategic part of the CFO. Let's first of all describe to the audience a bit about your background, your rise to the position that you've got, and some of those things that sort of tick the boxes along the way, and we'll take the conversation from there.
Right. Thanks a lot for having me here. First of all, it's absolutely a privilege for me to be here in this session. A little bit about my background. I started my career 20 years ago with PricewaterhouseCoopers back in Karachi. Did my 4 years training, and then I had a fascination to make my mark on the global landscape, so I moved to the UK. Worked there with a small accountancy firm in the heart of London. Did my ACCA, and then moved to the US with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I worked for about 3 years in New York City. So I had an opportunity to basically look at the corporate America and how it works very up close. It was a great, fantastic opportunity for me in that stage of my career to work in the Big Apple. From there on, I wanted to get some experience in Australia. So in 2008, I made a move with Deloitte to Perth. But 2008, as you remember, there was a global economic crisis which was going around the world, and I think that's where I had a little bit of miscalculation in terms of my career. I came here in 2008, and soon after joining, I was actually asked to leave because the firm was downsizing, people were getting laid off, there was no space in the economy, and everything was just, businesses were shrinking. So despite the fact that I was very interested and very keen in working in the Australian market, but unfortunately I had to move out. So I ended up in the Middle East where I started early in 2009, and ever since I've been living there, working there, and making some tax-free income. I definitely want to come back to Australian market. I got my family settled here in Melbourne already. So next year, hopefully, I will be finishing my contract and making a move back here in Australia. As far as my CFO journey is concerned, I stepped into this role, the CFO role, back in 2012, whereby there was a very well-known private equity firm based in the Middle East, Jadwa Investment, who was looking for a CFO for one of their portfolio companies. So they actually offered me a position. There were two projects that they wanted me to do. The first one was ERP implementation, which is SAP, and the second one was M&A. So the private equity, based on their business model, they had to step out. And then there was another strategic buyer that was already lined up who wanted to acquire the private equity stake in the business. Without any experience of both these projects, a prior experience, I just took on the challenge, and that's really where my journey as a strategic CFO really started.
So did you see yourself as, it's always interesting when you've never done some of those other parts to sort of say, yes, I can do it.
Yeah.
And yet, how else would you do it without sort of plunging yourself in there? Did you see yourself as potentially as a strategic CFO then?
No, I actually started as just a CFO, and just the CFO is the person who actually is supposed to, who is expected to get the financials out in time, and get the numbers, ensure the integrity of the numbers, making sure their internal control framework which is in place, and having a relationship with the auditors, with the lawyers, and to control the finance team. But specifically, these two projects were more strategic projects. These projects gave me a good opportunity to basically interact with cross-functional leadership of of the business.
Yeah.
Because ERP implementation, as most of you would understand, it actually entails reviewing the business systems and processes from all over, from different functional areas, from sales, from procurement, from supply chain, logistics, finance, and human resources. So that's where I got myself involved in really the operational side of the business, work with the cross-functional leadership team of the business.
Did you feel prepared for that, or did you literally just have to learn this as you went?
I think I learned it along the way.
Right.
Yeah.
And did you feel out of your depth to start with in particular?
Yes, it was. I mean, I was dreading, to be honest with you, when I started it, because without having commercial experience,
yeah.
My background was with the big four firms, coming out of PwC into the industry, and then taking a more of a strategic role was rather daunting for me. But I think where things went very well for me was that where I had a good team of people within finance, and since ERP implementation is a strategic project, it's not an IT project, it's not a finance project. So I built a team by hand-picking people from different functional areas.
So let's just explore that, because there might be people here in the audience who are at sort of CFO level, but we're talking today about sort of the next step, the strategic part, and making that leap into potentially the unknown. Some of the tips that you can share with regards to equipping yourself for that new role, given the fact that you've never done that role?
Strategic CFO is really a lot more to do with the commercial reality and basically putting together the commercial reality and the financial numbers together, and looking at the bigger picture of business. Basically, the difference, I mean, the way I look at a typical CFO role and a strategic CFO role, it's more of a difference between a financial advisor of the business and a business advisor. You know, it's a difference between the financial advisor and the business advisor. And the delta here between the two terminology is the strategic value. So strategic value, to get the strategic value and create it, the CFOs need to hone in their skills in basically 4 main areas. The first one is the value chain of the business, because you can, if you're just assuming a traditional CFO role, which is more of number crunching and managing the financials and all of that, you lose sight of the operational insight. But in the strategic CFO role, you need to have a very clear visibility into the value chain of the business, which is that you need to have a very good understanding of where the competitors are positioned, how they are positioned, what is the value of the customers, you know, what's the dynamics of the back office operations, and so on. And you have to connect all of these dots together. In order to do that, you need to understand what the value drivers of the business are. To understand the value drivers, you need to get hold of operational data as well as the financial data, i.e. tracking down the customer activity, getting close to the customers, getting close to the competitors, getting close to your key suppliers and see where the risks are, and how to mitigate them. So it's a lot to do with getting a good handle on the operational as well as financial data and making sense out of both of those. The third thing about being a strategic CFO is managing the talent, because talent management is again a strategic initiative. And in today's world, where we are living in an information age, so things are so robust, and they keep on changing every day. Information is the key. People who are agile, people who have good handle on information, they understand the data. Recruiting for your staff in finance is a lot more to do with technical skills than purely the financial skills. So So when you're recruiting the staff, you got to make sure that you hire people who have understanding of operational functions of the business, not merely the financial side of the business. Acquiring the talent, nurturing them, and retaining them is absolutely a strategic thing to do in this role. And last but not least is basically the integrity, which actually goes beyond, without saying that as a CFO, you need to have a very high level, very high degree of integrity. Integrity is not only to do with the transparency and honesty, it's a lot to do with the kind of leadership style where you actually make your presence felt in the business.
So learning all of that, I can imagine it takes a little while to pick up some of those skills along the way. The people around you, it talk about how you went and created the team that you wanted so that where your gaps were, they could fill.
I started with back in 2012, my new role my first role in the CFO. I started with my own team. So I used to work for a mid-sized beverage manufacturing company in the Middle East, which is a very well-known brand. It's called Gulf Union Foods Company. So I inherited a team, a finance team in that company where I had to do a lot of work to basically streamline the roles and responsibility of different individuals within the finance function. Like, for example, when I took over, I remember back in 2012, I remember one individual in finance was responsible of doing a lot of things. He was doing bank reconciliation, accounts receivable, a bit of accounts payable, and at the end of the month, GL function as well. So I basically streamlined the finance department into 3 divisions. So I segregated based on skill set and technical abilities of the people. I segregated finance function into treasury, into financial reporting, and FP&A. So streamlining the finance function was the first step, and then with the ERP implementation, it gave me an opportunity to actually reach beyond the finance function to interact and understand the operational side of the business, the commercial reality of the business, and to be engaged in people and culture development within the organization, obviously in collaboration with human resources.
How different do you see the strategic CFO role compared to the CEO role?
That's a very interesting debate because a lot of time I go in the conferences and I hear different speakers speak on the subject. I think a lot of CEOs, and I hope we don't have too many CEOs sitting here.
They're not allowed in.
It's CFO. It's a CFO conference.
That's right. I can read on the door. It's a CFO.
It's just the CFOs. Yeah. But CFOs are increasingly stepping into the space of not only the COOs, but also the CEOs as well. Again, purely because of their strategic initiatives and the requirements that they have in their new role.
So how did you work the C-suite? How did you work amongst the executives?
If I tell you about my relationship with my CEO, it's more of a I hope he's not listening, but it's more of a love and hate relationship. So me being, even though I consider myself, and I'm actually seen as a strategic CFO in the group, however, coming out from the Big Four background and an accountancy background, I am still risk averse. My CEO comes from the sales side, so obviously he's not risk averse at all. He's very aggressive in his approach, and he's very passionate about the business. Not that I am not, but if he's trying to take 4 steps forward, I pull him back 2 steps backwards. So we kind of settle down somewhere in the middle. So I think it's more of a very delicate balancing act when it comes to the relationship between the CEO and the CFO. CFO has to make sure in a strategic role that all the C-suite they are acting in a way which actually mitigates a lot of business risk.
So a strategic CFO really is a CEO, but just a conservative
Without
CEO.
a title.
Without the title. But in all those conversations you have with other strategic CFOs, do the CEOs feel threatened by the kind of all-round experience that you're getting?
CEOs can definitely feel threatened, because CEOs usually have, even though they're the superstars in their own commercial world, which we are not, coming from finance background. But I think the advantage where we get as finance professionals is that we can actually link the financial realities, the numbers, to the commercial reality of the business, and that's where CEO definitely needs our help all the time. So I consider myself, and I'm seen in the company also, I'm seen as the right hand of the CEO.
Right,
all the time, yeah.
You were talking about 2008. We're talking nearly 10 years ago. Did the term strategic CFO get bandied around then? Is that relatively new that we're talking about strategic CFOs? Were you ever using that expression, strategic CFO?
So 2008, leaving Perth, Australia, going to the Middle East. I didn't start as a CFO. My first job was actually as a finance manager, and moved up. I worked my way up the corporate food chain. So in the next few years, I got promoted from finance manager to the financial controller, and then eventually to the CFO in 2012. Back in those days, like for example, I still remember my boss, whom I was reporting to, CFO of my first job in the Middle East. He used to spend a lot of time. I mean, he's still a great friend of mine. I've learned a lot from him. But I still remember he used to spend most of his time in looking at numbers, spending time with his own team, making sure that the controls and everything else is in place, and less time with the operations. Whereas what I've seen in the last 9 to 10 years is that trend has changed quite a bit. Me as a CFO now in the present day world, I'm expected to actually spend more time, and I make sure that spend more time in operations, just sitting around chatting, having a cup of coffee with the chief commercial officer, trying to understand what the dynamics of the business is right now, what the behavior of the customer is, what the behavior of the market is, and how does that reflect on our business.
And that was the reason I was asking the question, because I just wonder how much of that is sort of coinciding with our disruptive world that we're living in now, where you effectively look at the role that you used to have and say, hang on, how would I do the role now, given the fact that we are in this disruptive era? Are you looking at all aspects of that position and saying, with a blank sheet of paper, how would I do this better?
Disruptions, especially the digital disruption, is basically changing not only the markets, but also business models and our roles as CFOs and the finance function as well. Sometimes I just ask myself this question, that if machines have to replace the CFOs, why did I become one?
Yeah.
Honestly. But the reality is that all of these digital disruptions, I don't think that they will replace the CFOs or the finance professionals. They will probably push us to learn new things. They will probably displace us rather than replace us, and that's where the difference is. The number crunching traditional CFOs would be pushed to actually extend their boundaries and broaden their horizons beyond numbers, and digital disruption will actually push our playing field as the strategic CFOs to have more collaborations with operations, with the customers, with the suppliers, and with the business.
So give me an example of where you feel that real digital disruption can really accelerate the strategic CFO's role.
Digital disruption, I mean, first of all, you got to understand that digital disruption, how is it implicating the businesses? I think the first thing is digital disruption changing the consumer behavior. I mean, look at the online shopping model that has actually emerged in the recent few years. Now that online shopping model has completely changed the supply chain function of businesses. So the lead times are getting shorter and shorter now. The shelf space is getting, the shelf life of the products are getting shorter and shorter now. So it's completely changing the consumer behavior. As a result of changing the consumer behavior, the businesses are forced to change their business models. So that's one aspect of digital disruptions. The second one is its implication, particularly on the CFO role and generally on the finance as a profession. Yeah. I think as a strategic CFO, we got to understand that we need to be more consumer or customer-centric, information-centric, rather than just number-centric. In our own arena of finance, I have seen artificial intelligence, smart machines, process robotics taking over. Without those, you can't really move ahead in your career. Imagine yourself getting a call from one of the business unit head asking you, or actually CEO, asking you, so how was the Q1 result last year, and how did that compare with the previous year? And by the way, what was the growth in your sales in the last 3 years? So what is the typical reaction in this situation? I mean, my typical reaction has been that I would just pick up the phone, call my FP&A manager, and I would ask him the question. I would just pass on this question to him, and I would say, okay, you go back in your Excel spreadsheets, do the trend analysis, come back to me so that I can sit with the business unit head and explain it to him. Now, this trend is going to change with artificial intelligence quite a lot. Imagine yourself having a digital chatbot or a digital assistant, just like you've seen Siri in Apple or Alexa in Amazon, where you just ask them a question and you get an answer straight away. So imagine yourself being a CFO, having a digital assistant. So if you want to find out what the trend has been in sales in the last 3 years, you just ask that digital assistant, and you get an answer immediately. I mean, you don't have to wait for your FP&A manager to actually cobble together different Excel spreadsheets to come up with an answer. You'll get it straight away. It will actually reflect excellent on you as a CFO because you are getting answers in real time. But it will be a threat to somebody who is sitting in the corner as your FP&A manager. It might be a threat to his job and his existence in the company.
So when's that going to happen?
So I think...
When will we see that? When will we see them?
I think it's not too far away. I mean, the way artificial intelligence is shaping up right now I don't think that it's too far away. I personally envisage that in the next 5 to 10 years we will see a rapid change in transformation in our finance profession.
This time next year we'll be chatting. There'll be another seat there for the little machine that just sits there. Get an insight from there.
Yeah. Likewise, I give you one more example. I mean, imagine yourself that you're doing reconciliation of accounts receivable. So a customer actually comes in and he pays $100,000 towards his receivables. Now that bulk payment is actually towards multiple invoices. So what is the typical work that the accounts receivable guy has to do in this situation? I mean, what he or she has to do is he has to take that payment if the customer hasn't specified against which invoices he has paid against, and then he or she has to reconcile it to see how it is reconciled with different invoices, outstanding invoices. Now again, imagine for a minute that you have artificial intelligence which actually does this work in real time. So either it escalates an email to the relevant business manager to get an approval of the short payment, if there is a short payment, or raise a delta invoice for the customer, which could just go straight away to the customer's inbox. Yeah. So again, implication of all of these digital changes and digital disruptions is that finance professional, they have to change their mindsets. Yeah. So it's not going to be only transaction processing job which you'll be able to sustain in future. I think it's more of strategic right from the beginnings. People, the people who will survive will be the people who actually will have more insight into operations, more problem-solving abilities, critical thinking, and operational knowledge, rather than just the financial knowledge.
Let's finish by talking about your role in a macro capacity and talking about Middle East oil prices coming down and the economy being impacted that way. Same here in Australia, resources potentially on a bit of a down, leveling out, call it what you like, that it is not what it was. How does the CFO, how does the person running companies on the finance side now look at that as an opportunity perhaps to reshape, reform?
Yeah. All of these economic changes have had a massive impact on the business, especially in the Middle East. I mean, I remember when I moved down there back in 2008, when the oil prices were up more than $100 a barrel, things were going all right. People were not conscious about, at least in that part of the world, about their cost structures because their money was not an issue. The cash flow was absolutely not an issue. But that has absolutely changed now in the last couple of years. What I've seen is businesses, the government all the way down to the businesses, everyone is getting more conscious, more cautious about reducing and containing their cost structures. Because in the current scenario, economic scenario, there is a limit to which you can grow your revenues. So the only option that you have in order to sustain and maintain your market share in your cash flow is to reduce and optimize your cost structure. So that's what the shift is, and that's where our role as strategic CFOs actually come into play as well. Managing the liquidity is definitely a priority in the current economic scenario. Making sure that you have enough liquidity, enough financing facilities from the banks and financial institutions to run your day-to-day operations. You have the right skill set, people with the right skill set in your team and in the wider organization to actually meet the strategic objectives of businesses. And also innovation, I think, is also a key word for the modern day CFOs in the current economic situation. Obviously, as the finance leaders, we don't have much technical product knowledge. Yeah. So I cannot invent a product, new product in the company because I'm not an engineer. So in my own little space, where I can be innovative is by transforming the finance functions, aligning it to the strategic objectives of businesses, making sure that I have a good handle on data. I have implemented a couple of ERP solutions, developed the dashboards, just to facilitate the decision-making process of the business owners, the operational business owners. So innovation in terms of transformation using business intelligence and ERP systems is definitely a great help in the current economic situation.
It's been a